Okay, thank you all for coming and so on. The topic is a really intriguing one, and what I'm going to try to do tonight is give some understanding about current events, what's happening in the world, why it's happening, and to some extent where it's going. Because believe it or not, there are certain simonim, there are certain signs that are very, very critical, that are mentioned in the Medrash, in the Gemara, and so on, and Kabbalah, many places. There are certain signs that are mentioned that have to do with the coming of Mashiach. The Mashiach, of course, could come at any time. Depends if the Jews do tshuva, if they repent, then the Mashiach can come any time that happens. If he doesn't come at that time, then he has to come at a certain appointed hour, and that appointed hour is one of the last times that he's able to come. So therefore, there are two different ways that he can come. Unfortunately, what it seems to be is that the Mashiach will be arriving, and when I say the Mashiach, I mean the entire redemption itself, which is quite an amazing process, will be coming not because the Jews are doing repentance or they're becoming more spiritual. On the contrary, we find that today's era, today's times are very, very difficult to develop spirituality. We are so overwhelmed by materialism and physicality in America and in Europe and even in Israel that it's very, very difficult for the Jewish people to wake up from the slumber of the belief in the physical and the material and so on and so forth. So it seems that the Mashiach probably will be coming because it's the appointed hour, as opposed to the fact that we will be pushing him to come earlier than that. How do we know when the Mashiach is really coming? Is there any real way to figure out exactly some of the critical ideas, some of the critical signs that tell us he's coming? So there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that certain things are happening now which are extraordinary, which are predicted by in the Medrash, in the Talmud, and they're actually happening now. And we would never believe that these things are happening now from 20 years ago. But they are happening, which shows us that the Mashiach will be coming imminently. When I mean imminently, we're speaking probably the likelihood, I would really say the likelihood is that he will be coming in the next 5 years. Probably the next 5 to 10 years at most. That means that most likely every one of you will be alive when you will see him. I mean, I can't speak about individuals here and there, of course, but if you all run the normal course, every one of you will be alive to see him, every one of you alive to participate in the actual beginning of the redemption itself. And the bad news is that the events that happen right before that are extremely difficult to handle. And when we look at the world, it's like it's a lunatic asylum. I mean, really, if you look at the world, it's like going crazy on every different level. And when you look at the world, fundamentally, you'd give up. You'd say, you know something, this is crazy what's going on over here. What does this have to do with Mashiach? So what I'm going to do today is really explain to you what the latest signs are, and probably the most critical, that tell us that he's coming very, very shortly. Okay? I cannot guarantee that, and I do not want to be sued if he does not come. Okay? So I'm not telling you that you need to alter your lifestyle dramatically, but this is something very serious to take into account in terms of what I'm about to say. The lecture that I'm going today, I very rarely have ever given it, maybe once or twice, and so on. And but it's something which is I think very powerful and very, very unusual. When you look at the world today, you see, well, I mean, just in the last 3-4 months, you see the whole Middle East is just turning around and going crazy. That's number one. You see things happening incredibly rapidly, things that we never expected. For example, you see like the Middle East, the Arab countries, where you have, of course, Egypt and Tunisia, and now Syria is inflamed, and so on. It's really actively under a real rebellion. And then you have, of course, Libya and so on. You have all of these things, and a person wonders, like, what's going on over here? Like, what is this, and so on. Well, first of all, a lot of people don't know, but one of my hobbies is that I'm a traveler. I specialize in world travel, and it happened to be that this is very strange. In February, I decided to travel to the Arab countries. So I was in Libya, and the next day the civil war started. I took one of the last planes out of Tripoli or Libya. Well, and I was in Libya, and I went to Jordan, and then from there I was in Syria. I went to Damascus, and then from there I went into Aleppo, into Lebanon, through the whole Bekaa valleys, so on. And from there I went then from the Arabian Peninsula. I was in Oman, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. So I kind of had a first-hand view of a lot of things that are going on and so on, and it's absolutely fascinating in terms of this. It seems to be that I was like one step ahead of the turmoil. It's like I felt there was a tornado chasing me right behind me, and I was like 2 steps ahead of the tornado and so on, and it was an extraordinary thing. But we see the tremendous turmoil in the Middle East, and we say to ourselves, like, what's going on over here? Is something happening that we should know about? And of course, we Jews say, does this have to do with Mashiach?
It's like a burden.
Yeah. The second thing that we see, which is really insane, we see the whole thing in America, that America's gone wild in terms of economically. Everyone senses that there's something that's happened to this country in the last several years that has never happened in America at all. We have a president who's like, I don't want to get into this kind of publicly, but we have a president who seems to be somewhat clueless about the whole thing. He has no idea how to handle all this foreign stuff. And he seems to be going off on his own tangent, dealing with issues and problems that have nothing to do with people. And we see that the whole promise of America is gradually diminishing. The promise that America was a land of opportunity, a land of wealth, a land of opportunity, a land of freedom, just a lot of things and so on, where when you lived in America, you said, thank God. And today, that thank God has a huge question mark under it, because nobody knows really what's going to happen. You see, we could be at the end of a storm, at the beginning of a storm, because, nobody knows what's going to happen to the economy. They're still predicting what's called a double dip inflation, where you have what's called inflation and deflation at the same time. And it could really get worse and that kind of thing. So we're all saying, well, what is all this about? This turmoil that's really happening. That's number two. Number three, there's this whole thing with Iran, that Iran suddenly from nowhere now threatens the entire Middle East. Fundamentally, it threatens the world. It's this key agitator to what's going on. And of course, Iran directly threatens Israel by simply saying, as soon as we get a nuclear weapon that we are working on assiduously, we're going to use it. Our first korban, our first sacrifice in this weapon will be, of course, Israel, the state of Israel. And we have every intention to annihilate the Jewish state. And they make no bones about it, So we see this, and we see this, so what is this, and so on. And you find that what the amazing thing is that in the United Nations, where there are a certain number of member nations, Iran, in the form of Ahmadinejad, has no problem saying to the entire General Assembly, we will annihilate Israel, and not one member of the United Nations stands up and says anything about it. You think that in the United Nations Charter, there would be some kind of a statement that one member cannot threaten another member. We're all technically they're all part of the same club, right? But no, here's one member gets up and threatens annihilation to another member, and nobody says a word at all. So we see that there are no righteous people anymore. Something has happened to the integrity or the morality of the world, where everybody's out for himself. Everyone is out. There's an incredible level of narcissism, of megalomania, and greed and selfishness with no principles. The American politicians, when we look at them all, we can't believe what we're looking at. It's like, I can understand you want to take a little bit more than you deserve, but these people are so greedy and they're so corrupt, and so on, that you can't believe that, the American nation has gone down to such a level where it's rapidly approaching the corruption and the selfishness of a third world country in Africa. It's not that far away. And this is like shocking because we've never seen this. I mean, we all know that politicians are corrupt. We all know this. You know, this is part of the, I guess it's an occupational hazard or whatever the story is. But that suddenly they should be so corrupt and so self-centered that they don't care what the people say anymore. They will tell the people what they think is best for them and so on. And then they would incur a debt of $14 trillion. We have no idea. And they say that's not even true. It's much more and so on. And there's no way America can pay that back in our lifetime or the lifetimes after that. I mean, $14 trillion is $14,000 billion, which is $14 million. That's unbelievable. And that's what America owes now. You see it. And you see that the American politicians, definitely the Democrats, they've completely corrupted themselves. But even Republicans, you see that there's no one up there who's willing to take the mantle of leadership and really stop this. And everyone feels that America is sliding downhill. And nobody understands what is this, what is it coming. And the ultimate question is, Mashiach. Does this connect it to the idea of Mashiach? And if it is, how is it connected to the idea of Mashiach? So, you know, my main area of research, and I don't know how many people know and so on, but my main area of research is everything that has to do with the redemption and Mashiach. And I've studied this topic for many, many years, and I've developed quite a big database, quite a big area of knowledge about everything you wanted to know about the redemption and the Mashiach and so on. And the truth is, I could sit up here for a full week, non-stop, you know, really telling you just about everything there is to know in terms of why there are two Mashiachs, what he's going to do, how he's going to come, or every different aspect of it. Of course, I can't do that. I only have a very limited amount of time and so on. So what I'm going to do is hit current events as it exists today and try and see what that is. Okay? So that's what I'm going to try to accomplish. There's a famous medrash. A famous medrash that was mentioned many, many years ago. It's a medrash in what's called the Yalkut Shimoni. And the medrash in the Yalkut Shimoni is a book, a sefer, which has many, many medrashim. It was written a long time ago in terms of this. And it was written by Rav Shimon HaDarshan, I believe. In any case, what it says is the following, okay? And it's an amazing medrash because it says that towards the end of time, okay, towards the end of time, it says that Persia, okay, is going to arise again and is going to agitate the nations of the world. Persia, okay? And it's going to frighten and agitate the nations of the world. But more than that, it says directly that it's going to terrify and frighten Israel, the Jews. That's what it says. It's going to do that. And the Jews will become frightened or terrified, or they will be really affected by this. This is Persia. And then it says, at that moment, when the Jews really don't know what to do, really, or they're really confused about this, what it says, basically, is that a bas kol will come out of heaven. A bas kol is like a voice. It's a voice that comes out of heaven. We don't really hear it, but it's like some kind of proclamation or declaration from the heavenly court, from God, through the heavenly court, and so on. And it said the following. It says to the Jews, he says, why are you frightened? There is no reason to be frightened. Why? Because he said, this is the hour of your redemption. Wow. That's what it says. This is the hour of your redemption. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, okay, Zatzal, said about 20 years ago when America went to war with Iraq, he felt, well, for some reason, I don't know, he felt that Iraq was what the Medrash meant when it said Persia, although I'm not clear why he said that, because Iraq really is equivalent to ancient Babylonia. Northern Iraq was the equivalent of Assyria, Ashur. Southern Iraq was the equivalent of Babylonia, the kingdom of under Nebuchadnezzar and so on. Persia clearly refers to Iran, okay, and the Medrash seems to be talking about Iran. So wow, look what it says. It says that the last siman, or the last sign that indicates the Mashiach is coming, is the ascendancy of Persia, in this case Iran, who will then suddenly threaten the Jews. Well, that's and this was written 1,000 years ago, okay? But he took it, Rav Shimon HaDarshan, of course, took it from Medrashim that were way before him. So this is obviously coming out of the Talmudic period. But that's unbelievable, because when we look, right, we look at the news and say, that's exactly what happened. 20 years ago, nobody would have thought that Iran would do a thing. What was Iran? I mean, Iran is a third world country. It's what it is, really. You know, under the Shah, before the Khomeini came in, the Ayatollah came in, which is 1979, okay, the Iranians were friendly with the Jews. They were very friendly with Israel. The Shah had a very good relationship with Israel in terms of armaments, economy, whatever the story is. Then one day, suddenly, what happens is the country revolts and so on, and Carter threw the Shah to the wolves like he did Mubarak, and suddenly this guy comes up, his name is the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was a Shiite imam, probably the biggest one probably in the world at that time, and he comes over and he becomes the head of Iran and so on, and Iran becomes an Islamic state. It was never an Islamic state. Under the Shah, it was a secular state. I mean, you know, fundamentally, they were Muslims, that's true, but it was secular. It means that the state did not necessarily represent the Muslims as such. Suddenly becomes an Islamic state with such what's called khumras. It means with such stringencies that it's like, you know, it's like Meir Sharm. Suddenly it's like, what do you call Yanniv over here? I mean, he wants Brooklyn to become like Meir Sharm. I totally disagree with that, but that's all right. Okay. But it's like, it's just exactly he said. Iran became like Meir Sharm from the Muslim standpoint. Like, what's going on over here? Like, and so on. And then for the next 20 years, Iran suddenly starts to move. It has a war with Iraq. Okay, and so on and so forth, and it keeps on going and so on, and the imams take over, and it becomes what's called the theocracy, which is the government rules, the religious leaders rule Iran. So it's not political, and it's a police state, because like, you know what's going on in Iran, nobody can get rid of this government, and if you try, you know, they just wipe you out, like they're doing in Syria and so on and so forth. But they're very strong, and one day they decide to go nuclear. Now, coincidentally, Iran is sitting on a lot of oil. A lot of oil means that they have a lot of money. Okay? So for a third world nation to decide to become nuclear is not simple. You've got to have the technology. You've got to have the intellectuals. You've got to have the scientists, right? And it costs a lot of money, you know. And they have the money because they're sitting on an enormous amount of oil reserves. So there they are. And they started this net and so on until finally we have a situation when Iran could make good on their threat. They can make good on it. All we have to do is sit back and relax and say, do nothing. And eventually, you know, Iran will develop the bomb. And once they develop that, they can develop a number of them with missiles, you know, that can easily reach Israel. So doing nothing literally contributes to the possibility that something major is going to happen and so on. So Israel is now very frightened, of course. It's not so much that Israel is frightened if Iran gets the bomb. Israel itself is a complete nuclear power. I don't know if you know this. Israel has hundreds of hydrogen bombs. You know, I heard once that in the 80s, that when Brezhnev, who was the head of the Soviet Union, wanted to threaten this and that, Israel actually said, if you do this, we're going to nuke Moscow. Can you imagine that? Little Israel talks to Brezhnev, we're going to nuke Moscow. And I'm not sure, but I think Brezhnev backed down or something. That's the power of Israel. You know, that little guy in Damon over there has like hundreds of nuclear weapons. I mean, they could easily reduce the entire Middle East to absolute nothing. You see, they can reduce Europe to nothing, really, in that way. And they're probably the next to maybe America and a couple of, you know, Russia, they're the greatest nuclear power in the world. What they're worried about is something else. Is that if Iran develops the nuclear weapon, what the problem is that no Israeli is going to sit in Israel while this is happening. So half the country will leave. Yeah, no one's going to sit around waiting for Iran to get. As soon as Iran announces or has the bomb, every Israeli, most of them will just get up and leave the country. They'll go to Australia, they'll go to America, whatever. But nobody's going to sit around waiting for this thing to happen. It'll devastate. That will devastate the economy of Israel. So there's a real threat. There's a real threat in that sense. So when we look at the world, it's like the world has become a lunatic asylum. And nobody is stopping Iran. No one. The United Nations, Europe, especially America. Bush tried a little bit before, but he was knocked out because they found out they had a report that was issued, I think, by some analysts in the CIA, that Iran has no desire except for peaceful use of atomic energy, which was an absolute lie. But somehow it made it very difficult for Bush to do anything. And now we got the President Obama, who fundamentally runs around the world on his apology tour and so on, and does nothing. Nothing. And they say that he has already accepted the fact that Iran will be a nuclear power and so on. So you really see that Iran is moving forward and forward. So what the Medrash says is actually happening. The question that we need to ask is, why? What is this thing? What does Iran have to do with the Jews? What is this? What is this connection between the two? And what does the Medrash mean that the Mashiach will not come until Iran threatens the Jews? And the fact that it is threatening the Jews is great news, because the truth is, we have arrived at the end of exile. We have literally arrived at the gate of the redemption. That's what it means. The Medrash says very clearly that when Iran threatens the Jews, there's a baskol that comes out and says, why are you afraid to the Jews? This is the hour of your redemption. It means it is imminent. So that's good news, and that's bad news. So what we need to look at is there any sense of all this? Can we make sense of the whole thing and so on? And I've thought a great deal about this, and I've come up with some conclusions that I want to share with you, and so on, and let's see what the story is. Well, first of all, let's go into a little bit of history. When was the last time that Iran threatened the Jews? Really? Story. Purim. Purim. I mean, Iran is Persia, okay? The last time Iran threatened the Jews, okay, was the story of Purim. What happened in the story of Purim? Well, we fundamentally know, right? What happened was that Achashverosh made a very big party for a couple of months, invited all the Jews, and he gave them kosher food, by the way. This was not treif, it was kosher food. And for some reason, the Jews sinned, and we're not clear what that sin was. And then suddenly, because they sinned, they got in trouble. Suddenly there arose a man called Haman, and he decided to annihilate the Jews. He kind of bought them off from Achashverosh, who needed the money for his treasury and so on. And that was it. And then you have the story of Mordechai and Esther coming up and saving the Jews. Okay, and then finally Haman gets killed, and Mordechai becomes the prime minister of Persia. Yes, in all of history, there are only 2 times that a Jew became a prime minister of a world power. One of them, the first one, was Yosef, who became the prime minister of Egypt under Paroi, who was the most powerful nation in the world at that time. And the second and only other time this happens is in Persia, where Mordechai becomes the prime minister of Persia. You see. So, that's the story of Purim. What is the story of Purim? What's really went on over there? You know, a lot of people, Purim, we do a lot of drinking of Purim, and there's a lot of this and that and so on. Does anyone really know the story of Purim? I mean, does that story make sense to you? Really? Here the Jews, participate in this big party that Achashverosh is given. They eat kosher food, and suddenly they're threatened with their extinction because of some crazy Amalekite called Haman. And Achashverosh goes along, and then Mordechai and Esther kind of knock it all off. Like, what was that story about, really? So let me tell you a little bit what that story is about, because that story tells us, fundamentally, the relationship between Iran, between Persia and the Jews. Why were the Jews punished so severely that suddenly a decree came out of heaven saying that because you participated in the Seudah, or in the feast of Achashverosh, you are all deserving extinction? What did they do? It was kosher food. And what happened was the following. You have to understand something about the Jews and redemption. The example I give is like a corporation. Let's say, for example, a person is a manager, and they want to hire him, they want to promote him to become a vice president. Well, they don't just do that. They examine his record, they look at his performance, and they decide if he deserves to be a vice president. So whenever there's a promotion possibility, there's an examination or an evaluation whether that person deserves it. But what happens if a person goes from being the senior vice president, and suddenly they want to promote him to become the chief executive officer of a company? You can believe that the examination or the evaluation will be top-notch, much more than the evaluation of someone on a lower level. which means that the higher you go, right, the higher you go, the more critical the examination. What that means is the same thing of the Jewish people. The greatest event that can happen for the Jewish people is the redemption, because that frees them once and for all from all aspects or manifestations of an exile. That's where they come into their own. So therefore, whether you know it or not, there happens to be a heavenly court of justice, okay? It's a court which is established to examine the behavior of the Jews and the world, actually. It's the court that examines your deeds on Rosh Hashanah. And it determines, like, what do you deserve this year? What do you deserve in general? That same court examines the deeds of the Jewish people as a whole and decides, the Jewish people, are they worthy of the redemption for the Mashiach, which is the top job, and so on. So what happened was, that's exactly what happened. Yirmiyahu, or Jeremiah, said that the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, okay? And Yirmiyahu said that this destruction will last for 70 years. And after 70 years, the Jews will go back, they will go back to Israel and they will rebuild the temple, which means that the first exile was supposed to last 70 years. Now, this prophecy was well known by many, many nations of the world, because a lot of people were afraid of the Jews. You didn't play around with these prophets. Even the Gentiles, the Goyim, they all knew that there's something about the Jews and their temple. You don't really play around with this. These guys are very powerful. It's what's called, they're connected, and so on. So when Ahasuerus, so Persia then took over Babylonia, okay? Persia conquered Babylonia and then took over the entire kingdom. And Ahasuerus knew about this prophecy of Yirmiyahu. And Ahasuerus said, I'm really nervous. Because once, if it's true that the Jews go back, that the Jews will go back to Israel, that's the beginning of the breakup of my kingdom. And this can give an idea to other groups, other ethnic groups in my kingdom. It'll give them the same idea. So he was very disturbed by that and so on. And then he started to count the years to see whether or not the prophecy of Yirmiyahu would happen. He miscalculated, okay, and he counted too short. So in the 69th year, let's say, he thought it was the 70th year. And he thought that, something? It ain't happening. If it ain't happening, that's incredible. It means I am now the king of the world, which he was. The Persian Empire was the greatest kingdom. And fundamentally, he said, I'm the king of the world. You see it. And it ain't happening. He made a mistake. You see it. So what he did was, he said, I'm going to celebrate. And he made this big party. The party that he made for 180 days was the party celebrating the fact that the prophecy of Yirmiyahu was wrong. You see it. And he invited his entire kingdom and so on. He happened to also invite the Jews. Okay. And the vessels that were used at the party were actually the vessels, many of them, that were taken from the temple. So check this out. The Jews are going to a huge party celebrating the fact that they're never going back to Israel. You see, and they're celebrating. You see it, number one. Number two, they're celebrating the destruction of the temple because Ahasuerus is using all the kalim, the vessels, the cups and bowls and everything from the temple. That's insane. So when heaven saw this, the heavenly court of justice said, what is this? They're supposed to be going back, that's true. But how could you redeem a nation like this who's celebrating their own demise? They're celebrating their own diminishment, their own exile. These people are nuts. So it was decided in heaven that this generation would not be worthy of seeing the redemption. Okay? That's what it was decided. So, when heaven decides something, okay, it's executed or implemented. And suddenly, there arose as the prime minister of Persia, Haman. Haman was really the messenger of the heavenly court of justice. Haman was given the power to destroy the Jews because it was decided that the Jews deserved the death penalty because of their complete contempt for the temple and for the redemption. So Haman is a product of that decree. This was not a random choice. This was not an accident or some strange historical event. It wasn't. Because when heaven decides a certain thing in the heavenly court of justice, they determine the engineering of that, and that's what happened. So Haman then goes to Ahasuerus, and he convinces him to destroy the Jews. This is what it was. Of course, thank God, it failed. okay, it failed. Why did it fail? It failed fundamentally because what happened was that the leadership of the Jews knew exactly what to do. What did Mordechai say? And even better, what did Esther say? Esther said, Sumulai, fast for me for 3 days. Well, fasting was exactly the opposite of the sin of eating at the party of Achashverosh. So by fasting for 3 days, the Jews would be undoing the sinful deed that they did by celebrating with Achashverosh. But she said something else very powerful. She said, Lech knoises kol ayudim. Gather all the Jews with sumolai and fast for 3 days, so that she could then go into Achashverosh and plead for the Jewish people. We're not going to go into the details of that. Okay, and they did that. They fasted. But she said something else. She said, Lech knoises kol ayudim. It means gather all the Jews. What she meant was go out and make the Jewish people into a unity, into what's called an aguda achas, a unity, one people. So you see that the decree of Haman was so powerful, it had probably from the few times in history the ability to unify the Jewish people as one. There was no such differences at that time between a Sfardi and Ashkenazi, between a Chassid and a Litva. All of this disappeared. You know what I mean? In fact, it says there that the ring of Haman, when the king took off his ring to sign the death penalty for the Jews, that had more power than all the prophets in Israel to get the Jews to kind of recant or whatever the story, or to repent. So that's the power of this thing and so on. But this is what it is. The Jewish people united as a people, as one. And there was no more controversy and conflict between Jews and all this Lashon Hara, all of these things. Most of this stuff disappeared. So it was an extraordinary thing that happens on. And they fasted. So they were able to avert the decree of Persia in that times. Now from that we see an important thing. We see the relationship of Persia to the Jews. The purpose of Babylonia was to put the Jews into exile because of their sins. The purpose of Persia, okay, had a different purpose. Its purpose was to attempt to test the Jews and prevent them from going back into Israel. It's the opposite of Babylonia. Whereas Babylonia destroyed the temple and exiled the Jews, the purpose of Persia, okay, was in some way to test the Jews, and by testing to see if they were worthy of going back to the thing and to be redeemed. So we see that that's the function of Persia. The function of Persia is to test the Jewish people to see, once they're in exile, if they're worthy of the redemption. Now we begin to understand what Persia is about. We now begin to understand also very powerfully, we now begin to also to understand, okay, why Persia must reappear. And that's really what it is. What that medrash is really saying to us is the following, that the Jewish people cannot have a redemption until they are finally tested in a certain way. And that test has to be conducted to a large extent by Persia. So therefore it's destined that at the end of time, Persia will arise again and test the Jews. You see it. Which means a very important thing. Persia does not appear at all until the hour of redemption has arrived. You know, it's like if suddenly your school announces that there are finals. There are finals. Well, if they're announcing finals, what must happen after that? Graduation. In other words, you know that graduation is near because they're announcing finals. You see it. One thing tells me about the other. And fundamentally, that's exactly what happened. You see it. And that's what the Medrash is saying. That before the Jews can be redeemed, finally, at the end, okay, they have to be tested to see that they're worthy of that. And then they graduate. Exactly. So it's very similar to a university in that kind of way. So now, Persia rises. Persia rises and so on. Now you have to understand something that's going on also about Iran. I don't know if many of you people know, but Islam is divided into two different sects. One is called Sunni and one is called Shiite. Shia. And there's a very big difference between the two. Okay? You think that the Iranians want to kill the Jews because they can't stand Jews, and that's it. But it's much deeper than that, because the Shia, who is the minority in the Arab world, they have been the minority for almost all of Islamic history. They may constitute maybe 10% of Muslims, and 90% are Sunni. What they believe is that there has appeared in the world imams who are messianic figures. They believe that the entire world will convert to Islam at the end of time. They actually have a messianic belief. Not only the Jews, they have their own messianic belief that what? That the world will become Islamic. And they believe that the one who will make the world Islamic is a Mashiach, is a Messiah. He is an imam. He's called the imam. And they believe that the 9 imams, 9 of them have appeared, and that they're waiting for the 10th. And the name of the 10th is the Mahdi, the Mahdi. Okay, the Mahdi is the 10th imam. And he is the Mashiach for the Shia Muslims. The Sunnis, from what I know, do not have that. They don't have that concept. So we see the amazing thing. What we see amazingly is that Iran has a messianic doctrine. It's a messianic doctrine which is in competition to the messianic doctrine of the Jews. And the reason why they want to destroy the Jews, because something in them tells them that, you know something? The one people that really can harm us are the Jews. So what we really see is a very interesting thing. You think that Iran is simply another nation that wants to get rid of the Jews. Why? What's this Jew hatred suddenly? So you could say this, anti-Semites, but these are a certain brand of anti-Semites. Just like Ahasuerus. Why was Ahasuerus, the king of Persia, so disturbed about the Jews? Because he felt that the prophecy of Yirmiyahu, if it takes place, threatens his kingdom. His malchus, his kingdom, okay? And he was the king of the world. So in a certain sense, we're looking at a global conflict, in a way. It's the same thing here. Iran wants to get rid of the Jews because they see the conflict on some level as global. This is a nation, the Jews, that are people of the book. They believe in a Mashiach. Yes. They see this fundamentally as some kind of competing force. Okay. And therefore, they have to annihilate the Jews so that they could bring the redemption. They can bring the Mashiach, and that Mashiach, what? Will do the same thing that a Jewish Mashiach would do, which is, and the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of God like the waters cover the sea, which Yeshaya said. Except to them, the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of Allah and Muhammad, and as the waters cover the sea. So they read the same verse, okay, with their thing and so on, with their belief and so on. So this conflict between Persia and the Jews is not just a simple matter. It's a battle in that kind of sense. And you have to understand something also. This was the exact same thing that happened in World War II. Hitler, and I'm just going to drop this, as this is a whole lecture in itself. What was going on in the Holocaust in World War II? What was really going on? Okay, and I just want to drop this idea, which is a very mysterious idea, about why there was a Holocaust and so on. We cannot understand why the Holocaust affected the people that it did. It's impossible to know that. We cannot know why 6 million Jews were killed. Forget about that. In order to know that, in order to know why each particular Jew was destined to be killed in the Holocaust, in order to understand, you'd have to be a prophet. And even prophets wouldn't know it, because it's very, very deep. You'd have to understand the entire concept of souls, or neshamas, reincarnations, and so on and so forth, and so on. But we can know a certain general principles, okay? And we see a very interesting thing. What we see is that Hitler was incredibly committed to destroying the Jews. What is he, crazy? You know, we see this from many different stories, okay? What we see, okay, in 1933, there was a reporter that spoke to Hitler, and I think he said to Hitler, "Why do you hate the Jews?" So he said, because the Jews represent the most toxic idea for mankind. It's the idea of the 10 Commandments. What does that mean? You see, you have to understand the essence of Torah and the difference between Torah, Judaism, Christianity, and Nazism. To understand the deep meaning of what the Jews did. The Jews produced of course, from God, the concept of the Ten Commandments. The essence of the Ten Commandments is symbolized in one word. The Jews, the contribution of the Jews to civilization was one word with two letters. That word was never really heard before in human history. The word is no. No. No to who? No to your own impulses. No to your selfishness. No to your greed and self-centeredness and so on. No. No to the body that says, I want it. I don't care what it is, I want it. You know, I want to have a good time. I want pleasure, okay? I want comfort. I want convenience. I want all of these things. And don't tell me no. That was the essence of mankind, that the Jews came up with the Ten Commandments, and suddenly they saw the word, thou shalt not. You see it. So Hitler said, this is the poison. They introduced the word no to civilization. I mean, he didn't say it exactly that way, but that's what he meant. The Jews produced something called the Ten Commandments, and therefore by doing that, he limited the magnificence or the power of man. Meaning that there's no God that can tell me no. Okay? Man is God, which he believed was called the superior race. Okay? The Aryan race. The Aryan race, okay, is the elite of mankind, okay? And that whatever they want, they have. That's it. The Aryan race, okay, and what's called the German people, or the Third Reich, which is called das Volk, or the people, or das Übermensch, the Superman, okay? Hitler believed very strongly that the Germans are Supermen. What does that mean, Superman? It means that they are God, meaning that the word no doesn't exist for them at all. So then when, this reporter said, so he said, I have to eliminate this idea. I have to introduce the idea, not the word no to humanity. I have to introduce the idea of yes, yes. You know what? So then the reporter said to him, well, what about Christianity? You know, they also believe in the Ten Commandments. Okay? So Hitler said that I'm going to expand on it. Hitler didn't say this, but on a much deeper level. Hitler said, it's a Jewish cult. In other words, Christianity, that's a bunch of Jews, you know, that believe in a whole different Jew called, you know, Jesus, and that's the end of it. But what he was really saying is something else, which is the essence of Christianity. In the essence of Christianity, what they believe, okay, in the word no, just like the Jews do. But what they said was that the entire Torah is fundamentally negated or nullified. So they took the word no and said, you know something, we believe in the Ten Commandments, but if you transgress the word no, you start being a bad boy, okay, you can get out of that. All you have to do is to go to your priest, okay, start telling him the lowdown, and he'll start telling you penance and this and that, and you're free, and that's the end of it. In other words, what they're saying is that, what do you call it, I'll say the word, but, JC, you know, and I'll say, you know, Jesus, okay, he died for our sins. So all you have to do is believe in him, and you're free, and then you can do it. Which means that they took the word no, and they made it into maybe. Maybe. You know, that's what they did, you know. It's funny, you know, I was once in Miami once, and I was staying in a hotel, and they were having a Christian convention. And I was walking around with my yarmulke there, so some guy said, oh, I got myself a Jew. I'm going to get him. You know, what a mistake. The guy came over to me and he started telling me about you know, that all the Torah verses, how they all apply to JC and this and that and so on. I said, excuse me, forget about all that. I said, you know what you guys want to do? You guys want to take the word no and turn it to maybe. And I'll tell you one thing. In Judaism, there's something called personal responsibility. I have to take responsibility for what I do. And the Torah says, you know something, if I repent and I change my behavior, I'm all right. You guys are not interested in that so much. The main thing is to believe in the death, which is called grace of your Messiah or your Trinity guy and so on. And you want to believe that that absolves you. He says it's not that simple. You want to abdicate and eliminate personal responsibility. So I'm not interested in what you have to say. Period. You know, that's what it is. And so he was so shocked when I said, and I said to him, don't you see that you don't want to take personal responsibility? You know, you want to rely on someone else. And he was like, he couldn't say anything after that. That's it. I mean, I cut him off the feet. You know? And I think he went inside to the convention and he said, you see that guy out there with the yarmulke? Avoid him. I think, I'm not sure, but you know, but he got away from me very fast. So Hitler's saying, in a certain sense, that, you know something? Christianity, it's a Jewish sect. They simply took the word no and converted it to maybe. You see it? The Nazis believe in the word yes. There is no word no. And so it's all about yes. And you never look at the anthem, the Germans, Deutschland über alles. I mean, what a national, Deutschland, Germany over everything. Like, these guys are so grandiose, it's unbelievable. The national anthem actually has this kind of thing. So we see the amazing thing who Hitler was. You see it. You think that Hitler was interested in conquering the world, or he was interested in the what? And conquering Europe and this and that. That wasn't his thing, because he was obsessed with the Jews. How do we know this? We know for two reasons. Number one, toward the end of the war, his generals, Rommel, actually the generals were saying to him, you're taking all the trains, and you're instead of using the trains to supply our armies where they are, you're using these trains to deport Jews to the death camps, to the concentration camps. You know, they're saying, are you out of your mind? So he said to them, don't tell me what I have to do. My goal, my fundamental goal, is to annihilate the Jews. That's what he said to them. And the last speech that he gave before he committed suicide in the bunker, the last one he said to the German people, we have failed in the Third Reich, but there will be a Fourth Reich. This is the last thing he said before he killed himself. There will be a Fourth Reich. And never forget what we have as the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to annihilate the Jew. Like, what is this guy, crazy? Like, you know, here the guy's losing the war. The guy should be doing everything possible to win the war. He doesn't care about the war. What he cares about are those damn Jews. So the question is, what is it? What's his problem? What is this, OCD, like paranoia? What is his problem? And the answer is a shock. The answer is a shock. No. You see, and I mean, sometimes I do this, rarely, but I will do it tonight. So you got to be prepared for my shock. I once got up in front of a shul, Shabbos in the morning, you know, and they asked me to speak. So it happened to be, I forget what it was the Pasha of Amalek. And I said, there was a man in the 20th century who was one of the greatest spiritual men of all time. And of course, they're waiting for what? Who was it? I don't know. Rabbi Brisker, Rabbi Feinstein, one and so on. And I say his name was Adolf Hitler. The place was stunned. You know? It was stunned. I quickly had to explain that because they were all gearing up to throw me out. Now, what am I talking about? Because you have to understand, Hitler understood the Jew. He understood the essence of a Jew. He understood the Jew better than you do. If I said to you, what's the essence of a Jew? You barely can tell me, well, this, that. He understood that the essence of a Jew is to practice self-control. And he said that's toxic, which means that in order to recognize the spiritual power of a Jew, you have to be spiritual. But, to coin a phrase that's been used a long time ago, he was spiritual from the dark side. Meaning that he was a tremendous Russia. But you think that a Russia is always materialistic. No, no. Hitler was a spiritual Russia. He understood exactly what he had to annihilate. That's a strange concept. You know, I think there was this movie Star Wars, remember, between Darth Vader and so on. You know, they were fighting, their fight was spiritual. They wanted to control this thing called the Force. So the war between Luke Skywalker, okay, and between Darth Vader was a war between spirituality. Who controls the ultimate spirituality of the world? It's the same thing as the war between the Jews in Moshe Rabbeinu, and Egypt. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't fight against the armies of Egypt. That wasn't what it was about. He fought against the sorcerers and the magicians of Egypt. And the question was, what's more powerful? The spiritual forces that were marshaled by the Egyptian sorcerers, or the force of God? So we see that certain times of history, what we think is a physical confrontation is not. It's a spiritual confrontation. And Hitler knew that my purpose is to get rid of the people who invented the word no. And he said, now that I have to spread this to the world. I have to spread this to the world. But wait a minute, look, listen to that. He knew that he has to bring this message to mankind. The word yes. Wait a minute. When a man sees that as his destiny, who is that man?
But it's not.
What is the name of a man that knows that his destiny is to bring a spiritual force? And his spiritual force was to get rid of God. Just like the Jews want to globally bring the message of God, right? And the earth should be filled with the knowledge of God like the waters cover the sea. Hitler read the verse in a different way. I will see to it that the earth will be filled with the knowledge of no God as the waters cover the sea. That was the battle. That was it. In fact, Davidowitz, when she writes the book The War, she describes World War II, she has a very interesting title. When she describes World War II, she doesn't say World War II. When she talks about the history of Germany and so on, she says the war against the Jews. She saw that World War II was nothing more than the war against the Jews. What? What war? Against the word no versus the word yes. Against the presence of God versus the absence of God. The fact that mankind is subservient to God, as opposed to the fact that mankind is what is ascendant over God. These are spiritual messages, and whether you realize it or not, every mitzvah, every commandment forces you to really make that decision. Should I eat kosher food? Well, that depends on my relationship with God. If I don't need God because I am important and powerful, I'm not going to do it. But if I do need God, then I will listen because my ultimate destiny lies with Him because He's the source of my existence. That's exactly what happens in every mitzvah that you're confronted with. Every mitzvah you're confronted with is the same battle between Moshe Rabbeinu and the magicians of Egypt. It's the same battle between the Jews, the Torah, okay, and Nazism. That's where the conflict lies. It's not that the guy was a maniac and simply wanted to destroy Jews because he felt like doing this. No, he had a purpose. And that's what he said to what? He said this to the reporter, which shows you an amazing thing. Yes, which shows you an amazing concept, and it's going to be somewhat of a shock. You see it. What was World War II? What was it? And again, I'm not talking about the death of 6 million Jews. Got to leave that out. What was going on in World War II between Hitler and the Jews? What was going on is what's called a messianic battle. You see, Hitler was the Mashiach. Hitler was the Mashiach, right? But he was the Mashiach of Amalek. Amalek, from the first day, had to get rid of the Jews. Amalek was the first nation that attacked the Jews, even after they got out of Egypt, where everyone was afraid of the Jews. Who would attack the Jews after they just reduced Egypt to rubble? Yeah, Amalek. The nation of Amalek, okay? They attacked the Jews, and they knew that they could die. That's all right. We will die for the word yes, because the Jews are endangering mankind with the word no. You see it. And that happened. Why? Because Amalek always appears right before the redemption. It does. That's why Haman tried to destroy the Jews. Amalek appears, this nation of Amalekites who hate the Jews, and it's equal to the Jews. Both have an equivalent global destiny. They do. Just like the Jews have a global destiny of bringing the knowledge of God in the world, Amalek has the global destiny of eliminating the knowledge of God. But both of these destinies are global. Not every nation. There's no other nation that has this, basically. The concept that a nation is created and sustained to bring a message to the world is unique. The Jews were given this global destiny, and Amalek was given it if the Jews fail. Whenever the Jews fail to exercise their global destiny, what happens is Amalek comes up and it tries to bring his. So the battle between Hitler and the Jews was the battle of who's going to bring the redemption, which means that World War II was another time that the redemption was about to happen. And this kind of Amalek comes up and takes place. So we see that this kind of conflict is a conflict which is much more generalized and so on. So at that time there arose a man, Hitler, who was in his own sense incredibly spiritual from the other side, from the dark side, who knew, I've got to get rid of the Jews, and this is the thing. And that man was so pure in his spirituality, in terms of its darkness, okay, that he would sacrifice his life and the life of the nation to get rid of the Jews. That is a Mashiach. Because the purpose of a Mashiach is a leader that elevates his nation to its ultimate global destiny. It's hard to imagine that. We think the guy was an animal. Truth is, he was an animal. You didn't? But it's a certain type of animal. It's what's called an Amalek animal. You see? And an Amalek animal has a spiritual destiny. Strange in that kind of sense. Now do me a favor, nobody tell this to anyone out there. It's very hard to understand. It doesn't make any sense. Okay? And the people will be horrified. But that's it. We see this constant conflict between the Jews and somebody trying to stop the redemption. Well, we have it again. We have it again with Iran, with Persia, don't we? Again, it's the same story. We have a nation called Persia or Iran that is a Shia Islam and wants to bring the Mashiach according to their understanding. You see it. And that only arises when, again, the Jews become worthy of the possibility of a redemption. So now we have to deal, and the good news is that the Medrash says this is the last encounter or battle. This is the last encounter, because God says right after that, don't be worried, this is the hour of your redemption. In other words, it's the final redemption. You will no longer see Haman or these guys. You will only see, you will no longer see Amalek and all these guys. This is the last one, and so on. So which means that the Jews cannot be worthy of the redemption until they go through another story like Persia, like Purim. The problem that we have today is that we see what's going on. We see Haman and Achashverosh. Where? Take the name, the president of Persia, his name is Ahmadinejad, or Hamadinejad. Look at the name. Ach is from Achashverosh. Haman is Haman. Din means judgment. Jihad means religious war. So you got wrapped up in this one guy, Haman, Achashverosh, with a war against the Jews. Unbelievable. I mean, the mother named the guy Ahmadinejad. She had no idea what she was saying. You know, but what prescience? It was almost like Nevuah. She identified the one guy that was Purim wrapped up into one. You know, in those days they had Haman, they had Achashverosh. Forget about it. Let's package the deal. A package deal. One guy, Ahmadinejad.
But what's going to happen in Israel?
Now, this is the thing. This is the key. Once you understand that this is where in a basketball game, right? What's the most important thing in a basketball game? The ball, right? Who's got the ball? Like a football. The most important object in a football game or in soccer, where they go nuts, is the ball. Like, where's the ball? Because the ball is the key thing that determines the whole game. I don't care where the team is. I want to know where the ball is. And I want to know who's got the ball. That's what it's all about, right? What is the ball when it comes to current events? What? And when you take your eye off the ball, you're in trouble. You don't understand what's going on. What's the ball today in current events? What is it? Persia, Iran. You see, you think with all this stuff going on in the Middle East, in America, you see all these things as separate events, right? No, it's not. If the Medrash says that it's Persia, that's the ball. That's where it's all happening, because it's the job of Persia to prevent the Geula, because the Geula is supposed to happen. Again, that means that you got to keep your eyes on Persia. It means that almost everything in history now, everything that's going on in the world, you've got to say, okay, how does this affect Iran? Once you get that clear, you can open up a newspaper and you can start to do a lot of interesting calculations and see how close is the Mashiach. Now look at it. Let's see. This whole thing that's going on in the Middle East. You see it. Well, first of all, now we understand what's going on with Iran. We understand why Iran went from 1979, from the Shah, which was a secular, third world Islamic state, to a state now, a Muslim state in the Middle East that wants to take over the entire Middle East and wants to get rid of the Jews. We begin to understand what God is doing. You see it. The only reason why Persia is successful, Iran is successful, is because, we know our sins, sinas chinam. When we don't get along, you don't understand this. Every time you have a fight with another Jew, every time you speak Lashon Hara on another Jew, every time you look down or disrespect another Jew, guess what? Ahmadinejad becomes stronger. That's why Esther understood this when she said, gather all the Jews and make them one person, one people. So therefore, our sins are strengthening Persia. We don't have to take him out with a nuclear weapon or anything. The way we take him out is by taking away his food supply. What's his food supply? His food supply is the accusation against the Jews because we are a fragmented, dismembered people. That's his fuel. That's his gasoline. Okay? And it doesn't make a difference that gasoline now is what? Is over $4? Because he can afford it. And you should know something else. Even the gasoline prices that just got up now, okay, right? It shot up. And it's not going back down anymore. And if you ask the question, what's going on? How come nobody's doing anything about this? The whole concept of the recession, where America's trying to get back on its feet, the whole thing will be completely negated. Why? Because it's the fuel prices. Everything that was gained on some level is now thrown out because of, you got to buy gasoline now at over $4, and we hope it stays there. So you got to say to yourself, wait a minute, maybe this also is connected to Persia. It is. Because as gasoline prices goes up, who gets more and more money? Right. More and more money, faster nuclear weapons. So who knows if these two ideas are not even connected? That the whole thing's to do this. Now let's take the second thing. Let's take the Middle East. Why are they all going bananas? Oh, so what happens? Tunisia throws out their president. Okay. Then Egypt suddenly does that, and so on. So we see to ourselves, what's going on over here? Like, what is this? So suddenly all the idiots in Washington and so on, they look and say, well, I know, because the Arabs want their freedom. And they are entitled to their freedom. You know what? So they're all going, they're clapping for what? They're all clapping for the people. You know? Now, I'm for freedom, absolutely. But in my opinion, the Arabs don't deserve freedom at all. They can't have freedom. It's irrelevant as long as they have Islam. Because Islam makes them at war with the world. As long as they separate the world between those who are Islamists and those who are not, which they call infidels or barbarians, and they see, it's called the war divided into the war of Muslims and the war of the infidels. It's called the section of the world at war. They see the world in those two things. You see it. So who cares about their freedom? Because of their belief in Islam, they must, in the end, declare war on the world. That's all they can do. So the tahara, or the purification, or the redemption of Yishmael or the Arabs will only come when Islam disappears. Not because they have a vote. And you see this. So when I first saw this, I would say to myself, what's going on over here? What is it? Is this really freedom over here? And so on. So you watch it, because you don't really know in the beginning. You know, it looks nice, it looks kosher, this and that. And then suddenly, you know something? This is just like the pig. Meaning that, you ever look at a pig? A pig, if you look at it, what? It shows you its paws that there's a cloven hoof. Now, to be a kosher animal, you have to chew your cud and have a cloven hoof. So if you go over to the pig and you discuss with him, he says, are you kosher? He says, of course I'm kosher. Check this out. And then when you say, but do you chew your cud? Then he says, he doesn't chew his cud. So the pig is kosher on the outside, and he's treif on the inside. Amazing. And that's what's happening here. This whole Middle East thing is really, it looks kosher on the outside, it's treif on the inside. And what does this have to do with Iran? When they got rid of Mubarak, who was a Russia, absolutely, without a question. But there was one thing about Mubarak, he was afraid of Israel. He kept the peace for 30 years. Whatever. You know, it's not the best peace, but you know something? Israel knew they have nobody to worry about on their east coast. They have Hezbollah in Lebanon in the north. They have Hamas in the west. They have PLO in the West Bank. But when it comes to Egypt, now why is Egypt so important in the Israeli military strategy? Because Egypt is the greatest Arab nation in the world. They have the greatest army in the Middle East. They have 600,000 soldiers. Because there's been a peace for the last 30 years, or a cold peace, whatever you call it, Israel never really had to worry about building up their army. So they saved billions. Because they didn't expect ever to get into a war with Egypt. So what do you need all of that, right? So they were dealing with a war against what? Hamas or against Hezbollah, whatever the story is. But these are small scale terrorists. But what's happening now? Well, they suddenly decided, okay, now that I got rid of Mubarak, who Obama helped, because Obama's looking well, Egypt is Muslim Brotherhood, who is the Islamic father of Hamas, just formed a political party. They will be running, and they want to capture 50% of the Egyptian parliament. 50% of Egypt, of the people of Egypt, want to do away with Camp David Accords. Do you know what that means? The Camp David Accords is what showed Israel you don't have to develop an army so much for Egypt. Now that's about the thing. As soon as the Brotherhood wins, and they will win eventually, if 50% of the nation wanted to get rid of the peace between Egypt and so, well, how long do you think it's going to take? Once they, it's like what one of the big guys said, I forget the, Al-Baradi said, he says, we didn't, he said, Egypt didn't make a peace accord with Israel. It's Mubarak who made a peace accord with Israel. We're in trouble. That means in the very near future, what's going to happen is that Egypt will become an Islamist state. Up to now it was a secular state, like Syria. It's going to become an Islamist state run by the Brotherhood, who is the sponsors and the supporters and the originators of Hamas. What do you think is going to happen then? Suddenly Israel will be faced with a new enemy on its border, the greatest enemy in the Middle East. And of course, one of the first things they did was they covered up to Iran. So Iran's influence now has been extended to include Egypt. What Iran is doing it now by having Egypt and Syria and Lebanon and the West Bank and Gaza, Iran is encircling Israel with Islamists. And even though these Islamists are Sunnis, fundamentally, but Iran is the one that has the money. It calls the shots. That's why Iran has taken over Syria, okay, and Lebanon. These are all, and Hamas, these are all Iranian proxies. That's all they are. So you see an amazing thing, that what we thought was some kind of new possibility is really nothing more than the old what? The old process. Where is the ball? Who's got the ball? You see, we thought that this whole thing in the Middle East was suddenly a new breakthrough in democracy and freedom for the Muslim Arabs. No, not at all. Okay, its ultimate conclusion, okay, is the tremendous threat, is to be under the hegemony of Iran. And Israel should be completely under the threat of all the Muslim nations. In fact, even in Syria, which is a secular state, you should know, or Gaddafi. Many people in the CIA say, we don't want to get rid of Gaddafi. We don't want to get rid of Assad. You know why? Because right behind Assad, who is a tyrant, of course, you know, and of course, but he's a secular Muslim. And Gaddafi, even though he's a Mashiach thing, but he's secularized to a large extent. So what's happening is suddenly the CIA, they know that if they get rid of these people, who's right behind them? The Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood is already provoking Syria and the rebel cause there and so on. You see it. And even in Lebanon, even by Gaddafi with Libya, yeah, we want to get rid of Gaddafi so fast. Not so fast, because Gaddafi himself said that the rebels are fundamentally supported by Al-Qaeda, and there are 30 people on the leadership council of the rebels. The rebels have only identified 10 of them and refused to identify the other 20. And the reason is because the other 20 are probably Al-Qaeda. So you call this democracy? What is this? No, 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 no. This is the Medrash. This is the Medrash. What's happening gradually, Iran and its desire to control the Muslim world is now suddenly encircling Israel with its support, its money, and so on and so forth. And this is what's going on. So we see that this Medrash has a lot of power to it, because the Medrash identifies the ball. Now let's go up to America. What's happening over here? And so on. Well, you got a president now who fundamentally, okay, is incredibly partial to the Muslims. Incredibly. And so on. And that he refuses, he feels that the entire Middle East conflict is due to the fact that Israel has settlements. The man is what? This is insane. What does this have to do with settlements? These people all over the Arab world are rebelling, not because there are settlements in Israel, because they're all governed by dictators. One has nothing to do with that. No, no, you got to stop the settlements. This is everything. So he is doing nothing about all of this, completely mismanaging the entire situation, and so on. And what is he doing? He's endangering the entire situation, because he's reshaping the Middle East into what? Into the sphere of influence of Iran. He refuses to do anything. All he wants to do is negotiate with Iran. Nothing. In fact, when the people of Iran rebelled against Iran a year ago, what was it, or 2 years ago, he did nothing. Absolutely nothing. He's the leader of the free world doing nothing for the people. If you would get rid of Ahmadinejad and company, you have an idea what this. That's the end of the whole problem. Because if Iran falls, so does Syria, Hamas, Lebanon, all of them. They all fall because they all rely on the money of Iran. So in one fell swoop, that's the solution. No, he did nothing to that. So we begin to understand why Hashem, why God, put Obama in his place. Because the truth of the matter is, the presidential election of Obama is an absolute miracle. It's a miracle. The guy has no experience at all. The guy went to a pastor who 20 years was totally anti-American, okay? The guy, his associates were every kind of terrorist and leftist and bomb thrower. This guy couldn't get what? He couldn't get clearance from the FBI if he wanted to become an agent. This is the President of the United States. So the question is, how could the people of America vote for someone, okay, who is this? Who has no experience? As a senator, he was the most leftist senator of all. How did they vote for this guy? How? That's a mess. Because God said, I want Obama. Why? Because Obama will let Iran go. Obama will suddenly encourage all the dictators of the world and apologize to them. It is Obama who will diminish the exceptionalism and the message of America. Why? Why is God doing this? Because fundamentally, I want Iran to become strong. The ball, the ultimate ball, and so on. So while he's doing nothing and while he's playing with us, while he's doing his golf and all this stuff, Iran every day is building through its centrifuges this whole thing. So we begin to see that this is not random. It's not random. It's not hefka like they say in Hebrew. It's not random. It's not an accident. That there's a cheshbon, there's a specific program going on over here. And what describes that program fundamentally is the Medrash, where it says that the fundamental ball in this game called the redemption is Persia or Iran. So we see how the tentacles of that game affects everything. You see, the Middle East, Persia, Iran, and also America, all over the place. That everything is centered on this thing. So the question is it going to get worse or is it going to get better? Worse. That's the question. So it's difficult to say. There are signs in a way that it's getting better. There are certain signs that it's getting better. Because you see that Iran has been blocked in certain ways because of Stuxnet. I don't know if you know what that, some kind of a software that the Israelis put into the Iranian computers and the things that smashed 1/3 of their centrifuges and so on. So you see they're having major, major problems. Not only that, you see that the Sunni Muslims, Saudi Arabia, and all the Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula are angry at Iran, and they see Iran as trying to completely shake up the entire Arabian Peninsula and so on. And you should know, King Fahd of Saudi Arabia, who's a tremendous enemy of Israel, is furious at Obama. Because he said, are you crazy? Don't you see what's going on over here? It is Iran that fomented the entire rebellion, which is Shiite rebellion, in Bahrain. And Bahrain is a tremendous oil, and it's an island right off Saudi Arabia. And he said to America, he said to Obama, you got to do something about that. And Obama did nothing about that. All Obama said, you know something? Just let them have their freedoms. Meanwhile, the U.S. has a naval base in Bahrain, and Obama was completely willing to give it up. It doesn't make any sense. So King Fahd of Saudi Arabia is furious at Obama because he sees the encroaching power of Iran. And of course, Iran is more powerful than Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia itself sent in its armed troops into Bahrain to protect Bahrain from the rebellion. And it quashed it. You see it. So we see that there's a tremendous amount of turmoil going on. And it's funny. It is strange, because as far as the Jews are concerned, our benefit lies when the Arabs have no freedom, when they are dictated by these people. And you may say, well, that's not good, that is not, you know something, democracy or the ability to choose a leader, or the ability requires certain, it's a privilege, but you have a responsibility of being a mensch. Before you can be given freedom, you have to be good to your fellow person. You can't hold on to a philosophy that wants to dominate the world and subjugate mankind, okay, to an inferior demon status. You see what I'm saying? But nobody understands this, because everyone thinks that the Middle East is great. All the newspapers, they're all screaming, this is fabulous, this is like the communist fall of communism with Eastern Europe. It's not. It has nothing to do with that. What does it have to do? What it has to do is this. It has to do with Iran. And when it has to do with Iran, it has to do with the Jews. Now you may ask, why is Iran so powerful? Because that's the thing. And this is the critical thing. God wants to bring the Mashiach, and He wants to bring the redemption. But when the Jews do not deserve it, they have to be frightened. They have to be frightened into understanding that the most important thing is the unity of the Jewish people. And we haven't got that message at all. So suddenly the Persia arises to give us that message and so on. And that's it. It's not that the Banishim is putting up Iran just to terrify Jews. God has no intention of terrifying Jews. Chas v'shalom. But what He does have the intention is this, is to teach the Jews that, you know something, until you behave yourselves amongst each other, you will have an enemy like Ahasuerus and Haman, okay, that will arise again and will teach you what unity means. But the Israelis, of course, have no concept of this. They have no understanding of what goes on. Especially Netanyahu, all of these guys. They're all completely in the dark. But this is what the essence is. This is what I believe absolutely is the essence of the matter. What do we do about this? Well, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is the fact that now Iran is our final enemy is incredible news, because the Medrash says that right before the Mashiach arrives, our final enemy will be Persia. Hey, we've arrived. Mazel tov. The bad news is that if we need an enemy like Persia to arise, it's because we have yet not been truly worthy of the redemption. That's the bad news. So what do we got to do? What we got to do fundamentally is this. We have to all look into our hearts, and we have to see what our relationship is with our fellow Jews. We have to stop the Lashon Hara. We have to stop the Lashon Hara. We have to stop the Rechidus. We have to stop all of these things. We can buy the book Art Scroll on the laws of Lashon Hara and so on, and we have to begin to develop a different kind of relationship with our fellow Jews. If we do that, and that alone, the Iranian tank will run out of fuel. And the next step is the Mashiach himself. Think about what I've said. Think of the whole program, that what you have seen is completely random, is an incredible program designed to bring the redemption to Mashiach itself. Think about this, okay? And think about how God is still running the world. That you think that God has left the world because the world is composed of lunatics. No. There is no lunacy when it comes to God's action whatsoever. It is a tremendous understanding, a tremendous process going on underneath. Let's think about that, let's change our behavior, and let's make a difference. Thank you.